There's something wrong with our calendar. I don't mean that metaphorically. I don't mean it as a feeling, a spiritual intuition, or a complaint about how fast the years seem to pass. I mean it structurally, mathematically, demonstrably. Something is wrong. And the deeper I looked, the more I began to suspect that the wrongness wasn't accidental. Here is the most basic version of the problem. The Gregorian calendar, the one hanging on your wall, the one your phone uses, the one that governs every deadline, every birthday, every fiscal quarter of modern civilization, is irregular, chaotic even. Months of 28, 29, 30, and 31 days distributed in a pattern no child can memorize without a knuckle trick. February shrinks in most years and expands in others. The quarters don't align. The weeks don't divide evenly into months. The months don't divide evenly into years. It's a system that appears on close inspection to have been designed not for human use, but for something else entirely, for control perhaps, for confusion, for the production of a population permanently slightly off rhythm, permanently slightly disoriented, permanently dependent on external authority to tell them what day it is. That sounds like a strong claim. Stay with me because there is an alternative. There always was a calendar system so elegant, so mathematically precise, so perfectly synchronized with natural and lunar rhythms that once you understand it, the Gregorian calendar doesn't just seem impractical, it seems intentional, intentionally broken. 13 months, 28 days each. 13, 28 equals 364. Exactly 52 weeks, exactly 4 perfect 7-day cycles per month. Every month, every year, without exception. Add one ceremonial day outside the monthly count, a day of transition, a day of zero, a day that many ancient traditions specifically marked as sacred, and you have 365. A solar year, perfect, whole, repeating. The deeper I went, the more I found this wasn't a fringe idea, wasn't a conspiracy theory scrolled in a notebook. It was the operating calendar of civilizations that built things we still can't fully explain. The Maya, the ancient Egyptians, the Druids of pre-Roman Britain, the Lakota, the Yoruba. 13 months, 28 days across continents, across millennia, without contact. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Why? Here's the strangest part. You already carry the evidence of this calendar inside you. The human menstrual cycle averages 28 days, 13 cycles per solar year. This is not mythology. This is biology. It is in fact one of the oldest clocks in nature, older than any civilization, older than any system of governance, older than any king who ever decided how many days belonged in a month. The human body was already synchronized to this rhythm before we had words for it. And the moon. The synodic lunar cycle, the time it takes for the moon to return to the same phase, is approximately 29 to 12 days. But the sidereal cycle, the moon's true orbit measured against the fixed stars, is 27, 3 days. The 28-day month sits almost exactly between these two measurements. It is the averaging of the moon's own rhythm, as if someone or something looked at the sky, looked at the body and said, "These two are speaking the same language. Let us build the calendar from that." Instead, what we have is months named after Roman emperors. July for Julius Caesar, August for Augustus. Months whose lengths were literally adjusted, stolen from one month, added to another to make certain emperors' months longer than others. This raises a simple but critical question. When did the measurement of time become a political instrument? The answer appears to be the moment it was taken away from the natural world and handed to the state. This is where the documentary shifts, because what I found, what the deeper research actually reveals, is that this wasn't entirely forgotten. It wasn't simply lost to history and mourned in silence. At a specific moment in the early 20th century, people knew, scholars, economists, reformers, philosophers. They knew that the Gregorian calendar was inefficient, irrational, and misaligned with both human biology and natural cycles. And they organized a serious, sustained, internationally coordinated effort to change it. The International Fixed Calendar, also called the Cotsworth Plan, after Moses B. Cotsworth, a British statistician who in 1902 published a meticulous analysis of calendar reform. Cotsworth's proposal was essentially a reconstruction of the ancient 13-month structure, 13 months of 28 days each, every month identical, every quarter perfectly equal, every year beginning on the same day of the week. He called the 13th month Sol, placed between June and July, a name that carried its own weight, positioned at the height of the solar year, at the height of summer light. The evidence suggests something much larger was at stake than mere bookkeeping. Cotsworth wasn't alone. George Eastman, founder of Kodak, one of the most influential industrialists in American history, adopted the International Fixed Calendar for his own company in 1928 and used it internally until 1989. He didn't do this quietly or experimentally. He did it because it worked. Productivity improved, Administrative burden reduced, the books were cleaner, the quarters were honest, the schedule was sane. Eastman became one of the most vocal public advocates for global calendar reform. He testified, he lobbied, he funded campaigns. And here's where the silence becomes deafening. The League of Nations took up the question of calendar reform in the 1920s. They formed committees. They received proposals. Hundreds of submissions arrived from around the world, from governments, from businesses, from religious institutions, from ordinary citizens. The International Fixed Calendar was among the frontier-runners. There was serious international momentum, real institutional weight behind the idea, and then almost nothing. The reform stalled, the committees dissolved, the momentum dissipated. By the mid-1930s, the conversation had effectively ended. The Gregorian calendar remained. The fixed calendar was quietly shelved, not debated to defeat. Not voted down in a famous session, not dismantled by a superior argument, just buried, as if it had never been seriously considered, as if the most elegantly designed calendar system in the modern era had simply failed to gain traction through ordinary bureaucratic inertia. The official explanation collapses here. If you want to understand why a genuinely superior system doesn't get adopted, you have to ask a different set of questions. Not why wasn't it better? It clearly was better. Even its opponents admitted that. Not why wasn't it promoted? It was aggressively promoted by some of the most powerful industrialists and reformers of the era. Not even why didn't governments want efficiency? Governments routinely claim to want efficiency. No, the question is who specifically benefits from the chaos, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Irregular months create irregular accounting. Irregular accounting requires intermediaries, accountants, administrators, clerks, entire professions whose existence depends on the complexity of time management. Irregular quarters make financial comparison difficult. A month in one quarter has 31 days while the same month's equivalent in another calendar year has 28. Try comparing performance across those periods. Honestly, you can't. Not cleanly. Not without adjustment factors, conversion tables, professional interpretation. The deeper I went into the economic history of early 20th century finance, the more the resistance to calendar reform looked less like inertia and more like interest, like something protected by the people it protected, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand or perhaps understood perfectly. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across other domains too. Systems that synchronized human beings with natural rhythms, with the body, with the light, with the seasons, have a curious historical tendency to be replaced by systems that synchronized human beings with institutions, with clocks and quarterly reports and fiscal years that begin arbitrarily in January because a Roman king decided January belonged to the god Janus, god of doorways and transitions, centuries before the birth of modern finance. Here's what I keep returning to: the physical evidence. Look at the ancient structures aligned to the 28-day cycle. The stone circles of Britain, not just Stonehenge, but dozens of lesser-known sites, are marked in ways that suggest a 28-station lunar calendar. The Aubrey holes at Stonehenge, 56 pits arranged in a circle, 56, 2 cycles of 28. Researchers have proposed for decades that these holes track the lunar cycle in precisely the way a 13-month calendar would require. The official archaeological literature treats this as one possible interpretation among many. But why is this interpretation not more central to our understanding of what Stonehenge was for? The Maya long count calendar, the most precisely engineered timekeeping system ever constructed by a pre-industrial civilization, is built on base 20 arithmetic organized around a 20-day period called the UL, but embedded within a larger structure that cycles through 13 numbers in continuous rotation, 13 again, and 28 days is how long it takes for the Pleiades, a star cluster considered sacred by the Mer, to complete a specific observational cycle in the sky above the Yucatan, the Egyptian civil calendar. 12 months of 30 days plus 5 aeminal days. Days outside the regular calendar, days considered mythologically dangerous or sacred. Sound familiar? One day outside the regular count to complete the solar year. The architecture of the solution is the same. Different culture, different geography, different millennium, the same underlying logic, not coincidence, not parallel evolution by chance, not three civilizations independently stumbling onto the same imperfect solution. The evidence suggests a shared inheritance, a common source. Something older than any of these cultures recorded histories embedded in the practice of tracking the sky before writing existed to preserve the reasoning. This raises a simple but critical question. If the knowledge was this widespread, this persistent, this durable, what exactly happened to it? it, and when. There is a specific and documentable pattern in the historical record of calendar transitions. When Rome imposed the Julian calendar on the territories it conquered, it did not simply offer an alternative system. It actively suppressed local timekeeping. Druids who maintained the Celtic lunar calendar were targeted, their traditions criminalized, their oral knowledge deliberately disrupted. When the Gregorian reform replaced the Julian in 1582, entire cultures lost days literally. The days disappeared from the legal record. Buildings were dated according to systems that had ceased to exist, and people went to sleep in one month and woke up in another. Moshe Idel, the Kabbalistic scholar, and others in the field of ethnoastronomy have noted that the suppression of indigenous calendar systems was rarely presented as what it was, a political act. It was always framed as correction, modernization, the replacement of superstition with science, the replacement of the body and the moon with the clock and the state. And here's the strangest part. The people who carried out these transitions, the administrators, the scribes, the priests who adopted new dating systems, in most documented cases, they appear to have understood neither the full logic of the system they were abandoning, nor the full implications of the system they were adopting, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, as if the decision had been made elsewhere at a level they couldn't access, and their job was only execution. The silence was deafening in the archival record. I found around the 1920s calendar reform debate. Key correspondence from the League of Nations Committee is incomplete. There are references to documents that do not appear in the official archive, meeting minutes that summarize discussions without recording their content. The Cotsworth Papers housed at the University of Toronto contain significant gaps around the years of peak lobbying, the years when the debate was closest to resolution. Not water damage, not cataloging errors, not the ordinary entropy of institutional archives. Gaps that appear on inspection to cluster around the most consequential moments. I want to pause here and ask something that isn't usually asked in the context of calendar history. What would it have felt like to live in a world where every month was the same length, where the first of every month always fell on the same day of the week, where you always knew without consulting a device, without checking a calendar, where you were in the cycle, where the rhythm of your work, your rest, your commerce, your ceremony, all of it moved in lockstep with the rhythm of the moon above, and some argue with the rhythm of the body itself. I'm not making a mystical claim. I'm asking a practical question. What does it do to a human nervous system to live for generations in a state of chronological irregularity? To never quite know instinctively, bodily where you are in the year, to experience time as something external and authoritative rather than something internal and natural. There is emerging research in chronobiology, the science of biological time, suggesting that human health, cognitive function, and emotional regulation are deeply affected by alignment or misalignment with natural cycles. The field is young, the implications are largely unexplored, but the question it opens is one I can't close. What if the calendar reform wasn't just about administrative efficiency? What if something else was being argued for and against? Think about what it means to know time the way you know hunger. Not to calculate it, not to check it, but to feel it. The way animals feel the season turning before a single leaf has fallen. There are indigenous communities that maintain the 28-day count into the modern era, and ethnographers who spent time among them noted something difficult to quantify. A different relationship to urgency, to waiting, to the present moment, as if time were something you lived inside rather than something chasing you from behind. We dismissed that as primitivism. What if it was the opposite? George Eastman died in 1932. His company abandoned the International Fixed Calendar in 1989 after 61 years of internal use. No major announcement, no official explanation, just a quiet transition back to the Gregorian system. The World Calendar Association still exists. The 13-moon calendar movement, inspired in part by the research of José Agulhas, argues for a return to the 28-day cycle. These movements are small. They exist mostly at the margins of public discourse. They are not funded by major institutions. They are not taught in schools. The deeper I went, the more the shape of the thing became visible not as a single conspiracy with a single architect, but as a pattern, a recurring cross-cultural multi-insury pattern of suppression, replacement, and forgetting. A pattern of taking something that synchronized human beings with the natural world and replacing it with something that synchronized human beings with human institutions instead. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm not telling you the Gregorian calendar is evil. I'm not telling you the 13-month calendar is magic. I'm asking why a system that was mathematically superior, biologically resonant, historically documented across dozens of independent civilizations, actively promoted by serious institutional reformers as recently as 90 years ago. why that system sits in the margins of history, while a calendar built around the names of Roman emperors governs every life on Earth. I'm asking what we lost when we lost the rhythm. I'm asking whether the word lost is even accurate or whether taken is closer to what the evidence suggests. I'm asking why the deepest silences in the archive always seem to cluster around the moments of replacement, around the transitions, around the exact points where one way of measuring time ended and another began. And I'm asking the oldest version of the question, the one underneath all the others. What did we used to know about time, about the body, about the sky that we no longer know we've forgotten? And maybe that's the most unsettling realization of all. Not that the knowledge was destroyed, destruction leaves evidence, leaves ash, leaves the memory of fire, but that it was displaced quietly, incrementally, replaced with something just functional enough that nobody screamed, just workable enough that the loss went unnoticed for generations. We didn't mourn the 13 months because we were never told they existed. We didn't miss the rhythm because we were born already out of step, handed a broken clock and told it was the only clock there ever was. What else have we been handed and never thought to question?